Now, the Fox 7 Focus.
As we mentioned at the top of the show, captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife have been brought to New York City to face federal charges. So what comes next for the South American country with the largest reported oil reserve on the planet? In this week's Fox 7 Focus, Rice University professor Mark P. Jones helps us break it down.
When you woke up early this morning and you see the news, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Some surprise. It's a very audacious move by President Trump, and it was at least initially a very successful move in that without significant casualties or really any casualties at all, they were able to surgically remove Nicolas Maduro from power in Venezuela and send him to the United States where he will face trial.
Where does the United States go from here? Because we heard President Trump say, we'll be running the country for now. So what does that mean to you?
We're getting mixed signals from President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who are implying that the United States is going to run the show in Venezuela from now forward. And then when we go to Venezuela, we see former Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who was then sworn in as president and replacement of Nicolas Maduro, saying something that's quite opposite. I suspect the Chavista regime and most of the leadership of the Chavista movement is right now in shock. They're trying to figure out where do they go from here. But now they've seen their leader, Nicolas Maduro, physically removed by U.S. military forces to go to the United States to face trial. We're going to see, I think, the United States try to negotiate a transition with the Chavista forces that are currently in control to have them transition power to the more democratic forces within Venezuela who are closely allied with the Trump administration and the United States, whether that's Edmundo Gonzalez, who was probably the person who was legitimately elected in the fraudulent elections that were held most recently where Maduro was reelected, or it could be Corina Machado, who's the real force behind the scenes in the opposition movement. But that's a tricky process because there's a reason why many of the Chavista forces have resisted any type of transition or negotiated pact with the opposition, and that they fear that once that transition occurs, they'll find themselves in the courtroom, in a prison cell, or dead. It's one thing to remove Nicolas Maduro from power. It's another thing to govern a country with close to 30 million residents, with a large military, with criminal gangs and Chavista gangs that are well armed, as well as guerrilla groups from Colombia in the country. And I think while the MAGA movement is probably mixed today in terms of its reaction to this, and that some are supportive of it because President Trump was engaged in it and it's removing a socialist dictator from power, others are very hesitant for the United States to get involved in foreign entanglements and I think we could potentially see this, and it could backfire on the president in the extent to which Venezuela descends into chaos or anarchy. So one potential consequence of all of this could be a ramping up of Venezuelan oil production, which could be really beneficial for the global economy and the U.S. economy more generally. But it may not be that good a thing for Texas, especially areas like Midland, Odessa, with the Permian, or even other areas of the state where you have a significant fracking presence. But that fracking, we know, isn't really viable once the price per barrel drops below sort of the 55 to 45 range.
How much of this is about liberation? How much of this is about oil?
I think the three things go on here. The first is an effort by the Trump administration to gain control of Venezuelan oil reserves that benefit the United States strategically and economically. There's a foreign policy and strategic aspect to saying no to China and reasserting the Monroe Doctrine that the United States is going to have a special influence over things in the Western Hemisphere. And finally, there is an effort to effectively end the communist regime in Cuba by turning off one of its principal economic lifelines, that's free and subsidized oil from Venezuela.
Some people have come out and said, why didn't President Trump clear this with Congress beforehand? And then he came out in the press conference today and said he didn't want anything to leak. What do you glean from that?
Well, so there's regardless of which party controls the White House, there's always a tension between a president who is going to assert that they have the power to unilaterally engage in actions which they believe safeguard the security and best interests of the United States, and a Congress, whether it's Republican or Democrat, that wants to be able to sign off on anything that the president does. With the growing fraying and polarization of the country and the decline of just basic norms of conduct that are often informal, I think there is probably some truth to President Trump's statement that he had reason to believe that if he alerted too many Democrats that this was going to occur, one or more of them or one of their staffers may have leaked that, and in doing so, put the mission at jeopardy, potentially putting the lives of American soldiers in jeopardy. At the end of the day, if you're House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries or Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the two Democratic leaders in Congress, you probably didn't want President Trump to have alerted you to this, because if he had, both Jeffries and Schumer would probably be taking flack from progressive Democrats for effectively allowing it to occur. So in some ways, I think while they're complaining about it, I think President Trump probably did the Democratic leadership a favor by not alerting them to it, because if he had alerted them to it, today they would be taking flack from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party for not speaking out against it before it occurred.